Hello friends, welcome to India Speaks Daily. So for India Speaks Daily bulletins, I've been generally speaking in Hindi because it's our language and I prefer speaking in Hindi. But for this particular video, for this particular episode, I wanted to speak in English because I wanted this topic to reach across as many people as possible. I wanted to speak against this event and I wanted my message to, get across as many people as possible, irrespective of the language they speak. Perhaps people from other countries, people across the world, I think should sort of get to know and understand and have access to the import of whatever I'm trying to say today. And therefore, I'm doing an episode about this topic in English as well. I'm talking about dismantling a global Hindutva, a Hindu-phobic event that is supposed to take place online from 10th to 12th September. It's an online event and I've already done many episodes in Hindi against this event, criticizing this event. And today I want to talk in English against this event. And this event is apparently supported by many universities across the world, especially universities in the US, whose names have been listed as co-sponsors of this particular event. Although there has been a lot of opposition to this event from the global community, especially from the Hindu community in the US, but not just that, now intellectuals from India are also protesting against this Hindu-phobic event, and on social media sites you can see, Hindus from across India protesting, although it is a bit disappointing that, that a huge section of so-called intellectuals and celebrities are sitting quietly and are not really speaking against this event as they should. And the surprising part is that, even though the universities listed are American universities which are supposedly sponsoring this event, but a majority of the speakers are actually Indians, and these are people who are known, to spread Hinduphobia, who are known to spread anti-Hindu propaganda in their respective fields. And as I said, since there's a lot of opposition to this event happening across the world, a lot of universities have also reportedly come forward and said that we have never given any permission to the so-called sponsors, to the so-called organizers to list our name as sponsors. And therefore, I think now the anonymous organizers of dismantling global Hindutva have also revised the list and also, removed the names of some universities. So now coming to this event, dismantling global Hindutva, what are my problems with this event? Now, first of all, to speak the timing of the event, it's scheduled to happen online from 10th to 12th of September. And it's hard to miss the symbolic significance of those dates, September 11th, the September 11 attack on Twin Towers, and having an event called Dismantling Global Hindutva that coincides with the anniversary of the attack on Twin Towers. There can be nothing more farcical than that. And perhaps there can be nothing more nothing more of a propaganda than that perhaps smacks of a global agenda, of a global propaganda. The less said on it directly, the better. Now coming to the event itself, dismantling a global Hindutva, my problems, which I'm going to list one by one. Firstly, the title itself, and the usage of the word dismantling. Now the event actually has a very strong title. It's a clarion call for dismantling global Hindutva. And it also surprisingly calls itself an academic conference. Now, how many academic conferences have you seen which talk about dismantling something? Can you imagine, an academic conference happening talking about dismantling any other religion or any particular religious ideology for that matter? You perhaps cannot. You can imagine the kind of hue and cry that would be raised if there is an event of this kind against any other religion. So the word dismantling is too strong for an academic conference, even if it was something called, the title said something like challenging global Hindutva. Then as a tolerant Hindu, because Hindus are tolerant, one could have still given some leeway to the conference organizers that, okay, there's a discussion they want to challenge. But dismantling is, literally. So, I mean, that is the kind of hatred against Hinduism, against Hindutva, that it's moving from, the legions of challenging to dismantling now. And no academic conference, believe me, I've studied a lot, no academic conference can talk about dismantling anything. This is just, then one gets the impression that this is just a pseudo conference. It's basically a political, polemical event with a very kind of extremist ideology. But then my question is, why masquerade it as conference? Moving onto my second objection in the title itself, Global Hindutva. Now, the premise of the conference is dismantling global Hindutva. So, if you go by the title, let's say somebody who doesn't know anything about Hindutva, Hinduism, India, about anything, when they look at this title, Dismantling Global Hindutva, they would just think that, Hindutva is some very extremist, violent ideology that actually has already had a lot of repercussions for world peace, for the national security of so many countries, that these conference organizers are talking about dismantling Hindutva, because dismantling, as I said, is a very, very strong word. So any layperson who doesn't know anything about Hinduism or Hindutva would actually think that, there are organizations, Hindutva organizations operating across the world who go around disturbing world peace, and there must be so many incidents of attacks carried out by Hindus across the world. But in reality, can you recall any such even one attack being carried out by Hindus in any country, by Hindutva agents, so to say, in any country across the world? Or for that matter, can you name any Hindu organization that sponsors or carries out such disturbances which disturb the world peace? You cannot, because there simply doesn't exist any. So the title itself is misleading, When you're talking about dismantling something, then you automatically assume that, that force is so violent and it is so harmful to the world peace. And that's why obviously the Clarion call to dismantle it. But here, the Clarion call to dismantle Hindutva, which unfortunately doesn't have any such history, and there is no such evidence to prove on the contrary. So this is a pseudo event. And if you look at the agenda, also the agenda is, mostly that leftist driven, self-fabricated, those kind of discursive categories which have been forcefully created. But you cannot, think of any evidence really strong enough to support this claim for dismantling global Hindutva. And then the word global Hindutva, again, I would come back to it. The irony is Hindus are, of course, they're a majority in India, but in many countries across the world, in fact, in most countries across the world, including the US, the Hindus happen to be in a minority. And just like minorities elsewhere, minorities in India have specific cultural organizations, institutions to protect and safeguard their interests, their culture. Similarly, Hindus in the US have Hindus in other countries where they are in a minority have these specific cultural organizations to protect their interests. So, what do the organizers even mean by global Hindutva? When Hinduism itself is, a marginalized religion globally, Hindus are in a minority. So do the conference organizers then mean to say that they want to dismantle a minority religion globally? Do they want to dismantle a religion which has so many followers in different countries who come across as, people representing a minority religion in that particular country? Do the conference organizers want to say that? If they want to say that, then it is, of course, and they do want to say that, right? It's a Hindu-phobic, it's a communal event, and it smacks of a communal agenda. Then the appropriation of the word Hindutva. The conference organizers are already on the back foot, and they of course knew that there would be opposition to this conference, although they did not think, perhaps, I think that, the kind of opposition that is happening, they never thought that, so much of resistance against this event, but they had an inkling, so they made this, very clever discursive distinction between Hindutva and Hinduism. And they have a disclaimer that, we are just against Hindutva, which is a violent ideology created by the RSS and the BJP, and it's an extremist version, but we are not against Hinduism, the religion. So a lot of people, and it's very sad, are falling for this very arbitrary, and farcical distinction. Hindutva is a word with Sanskrit roots, and Hindutva is a word that has been used by scholars of Hinduism across centuries, since times immemorial. Scholars, in fact, like Swami Vivekananda, have used the word Hindutva to represent the pride of Hindus and to create, a dialogue on Hindu culture and civilization. So do the organizers then mean to say that thinkers like Swami Vivekananda of Hindu civilization are hardline Hindutva elements? So this appropriation of the word Hindutva to, suit their own agenda and to spit venom against Hinduism in the garb of attacking so-called hardline Hindutva is farcical. And as I said, just look at the force and the violence with which the conference attacks Hindu. Dismantling global Hindutva. The title could very well have been Challenging Hardline Hindutva, or Challenging Political Hindutva, or Challenging Radical Hindutva. But no, the conference title suggests Dismantling Global Hindutva. So it wants to dismantle global Hindutva worldwide. And it's a clarion call. It's saying in the open that it wants to dismantle Hindutva across the world. And the poster itself has such violent imagery, the imagery of the RSS Karsevaks in saffron clothes, and then that, that kind of violent instrument, clipping the Karsevaks, clipping the Karsevaks, literally them being in the, that instrument literally grabbing them. It's such a violent imagery. How can such an event be justified, which is clearly communal and Hindu-phobic in nature? And coming to my next objection, the so-called event, masquerades as a conference, and that's their justification also, that, we have freedom of rights, freedom of expression, and it's an academic conference. How can you stop, a conference, an intellectual event from happening? So the point is that how can there be an academic conference which only has extremist viewpoints of one side? As I said in the beginning of my talk itself, an academic conference cannot talk about dismantling something, it can challenge something, it can debate something, but it cannot talk about dismantling a religious ideology or any ideology for that matter. How about holding an event called Dismantling Communism? Can I hold an event? Of course not. It won't be right to call it academic. I can hold an event called Challenging Communism, but I cannot hold an event called Dismantling something and call it a conference. An academic conference, if this was really an academic conference, it would have had some scholars, some views from the other sides as well, people speaking in the favor of Hindutva, views, counter views, and then, some kind of a discussion, a logical discussion happening, which we know as Shastrarth in Hindi. But of course not. Nothing like this is happening because it's not an academic conference. It's a pseudo conference in which there's an a priori agenda, attack Hinduism, attack Hindutva, and all the speakers come from a similar kind of anti-Hindu background, and they all are having, this venomous discussion amongst ourselves. It's more like, like-minded friends meeting over a poisonous lunch or dinner rather than a conference in which all sides are discussing their views, all sides are discussing the situation. So that's my precise objection. When it's just an extremist political event, then call it political, Just say that, okay, we hate Hindutva, we hate Hinduism, so we are having this conference against. But why, try to win this moral ground by calling it an academic conference and having this fake distinction between Hindutva and Hinduism? Because if you're just having viewpoints from one side, it's anything but an academic conference. And as I said, by masquerading it is an academic conference, they're playing a very clever game, which is reaching youth across, not just across India, but youth from across the world. And that explains the angle of the university tie-up. And this is a very dangerous trend because this youth, also involves a lot of... This would also involve a lot of Hindu youth, So a lot of Hindus, for example, just imagine, I'm a Hindu student going to college, and I'm exposed to, such kind of events and such kind of Hindu phobia. And, this is the kind of stuff that my faculties or my friends talk around, my peer group people talk about all the time, that, Hinduism is so uncool and there's so much of patriarchy. Why do you celebrate these Hindu festivals? They're full of so much of shit and patriarchy, and they're so repressive. Your customs are so repressive. So if as a Hindu student, in that modern ambience, I keep on listening to all these things all the time, then of course, they would have an impact on my psychology, right? Because my psychology is still unformed. I'm still impressionable. I still haven't formed ideas about the world. So I'm very vulnerable to this kind of propaganda. And also because I'm so young, I want to be cool and I want to be a part of the crowd. I want to be intellectual. I don't want to be thought of as backward. The last thing any young person wants to be thought of as is, backward and fundamentalist. And that's precisely the aspect of our psyche that this kind of propaganda plays upon, that it preys upon. And that is the bigger danger of this kind of, an event called dismantling global Hindutva, that ultimately it has the very dangerous potential of turning young people following Hinduism against their own culture, and, them becoming warriors against their own culture without having any knowledge about it, really. And that is a very dangerous thing, and this has already started happening. And the only way to counter it, I think, stopping this conference, I don't know if it will be stopped or not, is not really the way forward. Of course, what matters is that we are speaking, and there's so much opposition against this conference. So even if this conference is not getting stopped, even if it is happening, our voices have been heard, because there's so many counter voices emerging against this so-called conference. But what really is needed to upturn this, as I said, is a counter-cultural movement, a social movement, and we need a lot of, imagination, a lot of innovativeness to have this movement across the world, a movement, that sort of inculcates a respect for for Hindu cultural beliefs and ancient civilization, but a movement that is also modern at the same time, and a movement, that appeals to people across all age groups, and a movement against which nobody can level those accusations, that this is backward or fundamentalist. So we need to sort of, I think, also somewhere reimagine global Hindu sensibilities in a way that we can create a cultural movement, and that is a social movement for Hindu culture and civilization. And trust me, I think that is the only way to counter this kind of propaganda against Hinduism globally.